Good morning. How's everybody doing? Good. Glad to see everyone here this morning. Hopefully you've had a good week, and it's good to be together worshiping God as a church family. Before we get started here today, let's go to God in prayer. God, we thank you so much for all the blessings that you give us. Everything that is good in our life we know comes from you. You are the Father who gives good gifts, and we just thank you so much for how blessed we are to live in this country, and how blessed we are to have friends and family to worship with, a building to come together and worship you as a church family. And I just thank you so much for each and every person here, and how you have provided for them, and how you have worked in their lives. And I just pray that you will continue to do so. I pray that you would continue to work through this church to reach lost people in this community, that more and more people would come to know you as their Lord and Savior because of the service that this church does in this community. And it's in your name I pray. Amen. In the 2nd century A.D., a pandemic hit the Roman Empire. Most historians believe that it was brought on by soldiers returning from war in the Far East. Now, this pandemic is called the Plague of Gallons because there was a Greek physician named Gallons who documented the symptoms of the infected. Most modern medical professionals believe that those symptoms are mostly consistent with smallpox. This disease plagued the empire for nearly 20 years. You think we have it bad? They dealt with this plague for 20 years during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, and it claimed the lives of an estimated 5 to 10 million people. In his meditations, Marcus Aurelius wrote this: "An infected mind is a far more dangerous pestilence than any plague. One only threatens your life, the other destroys your character. Far greater than the effects of the disease were the psychological effects. The disease killed in waves, but the fear never left." There was one Roman teacher named Aelius Aristides. He wrote that he contracted the disease, but then he recovered. He got well, it didn't take his life, and he was convinced that he only survived because the gods chose to take a young boy instead. He believed that he lived because the boy did not. He was forever plagued with survivor's guilt. Archaeologists have found amulets and carved idols all over the territory of the Roman Empire that were made in an attempt to ward off this disease. The entire city of Hierapolis came together and erected a giant statue of the god Apollo with the inscription, "The Averter of Evil," in an attempt to save the townspeople, to spare them from this plague. They believed that Apollo could save them, avert them from evil. Now, really, things are not much different today. A recent study by the Kaiser Foundation found that 50% of people in the United States have struggled with a mental or emotional health issue throughout the pandemic. The CDC reported not long ago that 25% of young adults have contemplated suicide. Divorce rates have gone up, addictions have increased, and domestic and child abuse rates have gone up. Emotions have been running high over the last year and a half. And uncontrolled emotions can cause damage to relationships, cause distance between you and God, and can take a toll on your overall health. There are certain things that can just eat us up inside. And we're going to talk about them over the next 5 weeks. And this morning we're starting a new sermon series called What's Eating You? where we're going to be taking one topic a week and discussing what the Bible has to say about them. Things that can cause us emotional and mental distress. Things like addiction, anxiety, depression, and grief. This morning, we're going to confront anger. Anger is defined as a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. Let's be honest here. How many of you have felt a strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility just this morning? On your way here in traffic, maybe. I feel that every morning trying to get Landon ready for school. A strong feeling of annoyance, displeasure, or hostility. All of us have had feelings of anger. It's an emotion. It's a natural human response to stress, to being wronged, to someone you love being wronged, to inconvenience, to all sorts of things. It is a natural human response. Whenever something happens that we didn't want to happen, or if something happens that we think shouldn't have happened the way it did, or if we think that something should have happened differently, these are times when anger is often our response. And it is a natural human response. It's not wrong to get angry. In fact, at Ephesians 4:26, the Apostle Paul instructed Christians, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. So that means that it is possible to be angry and not sin. There are many times, actually, when anger is good. The Bible calls it righteous indignation. Jesus himself got angry with injustice. God gets angry in the face of sin. God's wrath is poured out because of his anger. His wrath is poured out on sinners because of his righteous indignation. Righteous anger fuels us as followers of Christ to right injustices and fight for the dignity of the marginalized and to change unjust systems and institutions. It makes me angry that 3,000 babies are legally murdered every single day in the United States by abortion providers. They receive no justice for the crime committed against them, that they receive no protection under the law. It makes me angry that there are 70 different countries right now around the world currently at war. 70 countries that have collectively created over 26 million refugees worldwide. Half of them are under the age of 18. They've lost their homes, they've lost their possessions, everything that they own, and they have been displaced from the country that is their home. The numbers of deaths caused by all the different wars going on around the world is difficult to quantify. Not all countries report accurate numbers, but conservative numbers put it in the hundreds of thousands every single year. People who've died, civilians who die, soldiers who die every single year because of war. The amount of property destroyed is valued well into the billions. It makes me angry that there are over 40 million people today in 2021 that are enslaved around the world. I just read an article a week or so ago about a family who sold their 4-year-old daughter into slavery to the Taliban in exchange for food to feed the rest of their family. Those types of evil things going on around the world makes me very angry. The prevalence of evil drives me to do whatever I can to spread light into this dark world, to bring hope and love and compassion where there is pain and abuse and iniquity. Sometimes anger is an appropriate response. Anger is an appropriate response to instances of injustice, but sin is not. Responding to injustice with more injustice does absolutely nothing to rectify the injustice. We should not ever return evil with evil or insult with insult, but instead return evil with blessing. However, there are times when our anger isn't so righteous. Continuing on in Ephesians 4, Paul instructed Christians at verse 31 to get rid of all anger, to get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger. Paul said, in your anger do not sin, but then he went on to say, get rid of all of your anger. Anger is a natural human response. It isn't wrong to get angry, but Christians are to do two things when we have this emotion. We are to be angry and not sin, and then get rid of our anger altogether. We must control our actions when we get angry by not sinning. And then we are to control our emotions by getting rid of our anger altogether. One translation of this verse puts it like this: don't let your anger control you. We need to control our anger. Oftentimes, one of two things happen when we get angry. It either spills out or it gets shoved in. Some people have hot tempers. You may know someone like that. They wear their emotions on their sleeves. When they get angry, it just all spills out. Every single time. People start to walk on eggshells around them because they know that the slightest little thing will just set them off. I don't know if you know anybody like that, but other people, however, tend to be non-confrontational. They're more reserved, so they shove their anger down. They bottle it up inside. And at some point, it becomes too much, and they just explode. They blow their lid. Something made them angry, and they didn't deal with it, and then something else, and then something else, and unresolved anger built on top of unresolved anger, and then you leave one unwashed dish in the sink, and they completely unload on you, and you're sitting there asking, where'd that come from? Not that that's ever happened before to anyone, I'm sure. It isn't anger that causes so much destruction in our lives and in our relationships. It is unresolved anger. It's anger that we haven't properly dealt with and processed and worked through. Anger that hasn't been properly dealt with leads to our anger controlling us instead of us controlling our anger. And so the question is, what should we do to not let our feelings of anger control us? What should we do to control our emotions, to control our anger? There's a story found in Exodus chapter 17 that I think can help us in those times that we need to work through our anger. And if you have your Bibles, you can turn there. That'll be our primary passage this morning, Exodus chapter 17. The words will also be on the screen behind me. To give you a little background of what's going on here in Exodus 17, the people of Israel were in the country of Egypt, and they were enslaved. They were in slavery to the Egyptians, and God called a man named Moses to go to Egypt and set the people free from slavery. And he called Moses to lead the people out into the desert to travel back toward their ancestral home, the land of Canaan. On their way out of Egypt, before they get into the desert, they made a pit stop at a mountain called Mount Sinai, and that's where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments, and that's kind of where we pick up here in Exodus chapter 17. Moses has come down the mountain, and he's ready to lead the people out into the desert to travel back to the land of Canaan. So Exodus chapter 17, we're going to start in verse 1. The whole community of Israel set out from the desert of Sin. That's where Mount Sinai was located, traveling from place to place as the Lord commanded. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. So they quarreled with Moses, and they said, "Give us water to drink." Moses replied, Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you put the Lord to the test? But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" The people of Israel, they were traveling through the desert, and they stopped to camp in a place where there was no water. We aren't told the circumstances that led to this decision to set up camp at this place called Rephidim. But, maybe it was because they were walking through the desert. The people started grumbling and complaining, because it seems like that's what they did. And they talked about being tired, needing to rest. And so maybe Moses just threw up his hands and said, "All right, fine, we're just going to camp right here." Or maybe they were walking through the desert. It started getting late. It was starting to get dark. And so maybe they just thought, well, this is where we're at. It's too dark to continue. We're just going to set up here. We don't know the circumstances that led to this decision as to why they camped at Rephidim. And it's totally understandable why the people would be upset. I know I would be upset if we were setting up camp and there's no water. Not having water in the middle of the desert is a big deal. I can kind of imagine that maybe as they were setting up their camp, they said, "All right, let's set up camp." And so everybody got to the business of pitching their tents and setting up their camp. And right in the middle of all the action, a kid comes up to their mom and yanks on their mom's dress and says, "Mommy, I'm thirsty." That happens a lot in my house. And the mom says, "Okay, honey, let me finish putting this tent up and I'll get you some water." And then the kid says, "But I'm really thirsty." That was a poor imitation of a child. But that sounds like a kid I know very well. He tells me he's thirsty. I say, "Okay, I'll get in a minute. I'm really thirsty." Okay, so maybe the mom says, "Okay." So she stops what she's doing. She grabs a pitcher and she goes around and asks the other moms, "Hey, did anybody see a stream close by? I need to get some water for my kid." And so the moms get to talking and they start looking for water, and they find out, my goodness, there is no source of water close by. So what do the moms do? They go, and you know how it goes, they go and talk to their husbands. And they say, "You need to do something. We camped out where there isn't any water." "What do you mean there isn't any water?" Well, I mean there isn't any water. What? And so maybe the men start talking and they start saying, "What was Moses thinking having us stop here where there is no water? That was an awful decision." And so you know how it goes. Word spreads and people talk, and then what happens? That's when the rumors and the conspiracies start floating around. Moses decided to set up camp because he wants to kill us. That was his plan all along. He went to Pharaoh. He sent those 10 plagues to Egypt to convince Pharaoh to set us free so that he could lead us out into the desert just so we could die of thirst. That's what they accused Moses of. I don't know if you've been following the news here recently, but that sounds pretty familiar. This is a conspiracy theory. People got afraid, and their fear led to anger, and their anger led them to blame, to come up with reasons why what is happening was happening. And they turn their anger on the person they believe to be the cause of their situation. And they come up with rumors and they come up with conspiracy theories, and their anger turns into despair. The people of Israel were caught up in uncontrolled anger. They were letting their emotions control them and not controlling their emotions. And Moses wasn't innocent either. They went to him, they demanded that he give them water, and he shot it right back at them. "Why are you accusing me? Why are you coming to me? Why are you putting the Lord to the test?" He responded to their anger with his own anger. But what happened next is the pivotal moment that changed the entire situation. Verse 4. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, "What am I to do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." Well, that's a little dramatic, Moses. They haven't talked about that yet. They aren't saying that they're going to kill you yet. He's still in an emotional state. But what he did changed everything. Instead of continuing to direct his anger and his emotions at the people who were attacking him, the people who were accusing him, he redirected his focus to God. And he asked God for help. He prayed. The first step in controlling your anger, controlling your actions when you are angry, and letting go of your anger is to pray. Pray and ask God for help. Pray and ask God to help you know what to do, how to respond, how to navigate this situation without letting your emotions get the best of you. Pray to God to give you the strength and the courage to respond, instead of just bottling it up and keeping it in and not responding and resolving it at all. Pray to God to help you to respond with grace and with wisdom. And then, when Moses did that, after he prayed, God told him exactly what to do. Verse 5. The Lord answered Moses, "Walk on ahead of the people, take with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. I will stand there before you by the rock at Horeb. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." God told Moses to go on ahead of the people. He told Moses, be the leader. Set the example. And God told Moses to take other leaders with him. The next step in controlling your anger is to be the first one to calm down. Be the first one to extend grace. Be the first one to resolve the situation. Be the leader. Set the example. And influence other people to calm down in the situation as well. Be the one who shifts their focus away from their anger toward God. And it's so easy for us to do exactly what everyone else in our culture does when we get angry. We can get angry, and we can yell, and we can insult people, and we can cuss people out, and we can riot, and we can destroy things, and we can set things on fire. It is so easy for us to just respond to our anger emotionally and let our emotions control us. That's the easy thing to do when we get angry. That's how the world deals with their anger. That is not how Christians deal with anger. The world throws temper tantrums. But Christians are called to be leaders who control their anger instead of letting their anger control them. I was in the dry cleaners not too long ago, and I was waiting to pick up a coat, a sport coat that I had dropped off to be dry cleaned. And there was an older black lady that was in front of me, standing at the counter. And I don't know, I just walked in the middle of this situation. I don't know the entire situation, but there had obviously been some sort of miscommunication between her and the lady that worked there when she originally dropped off her clothes. She had dropped off a bunch of clothes. It was a lot, like 5 pairs of pants, 5 shirts, all kinds of clothes that she was picking up. And apparently what had happened, I kind of ascertained this from the argument, but apparently the lady that worked there decided to split her clothes into 2 orders because there were so many of them. I don't know exactly why she did this, but this is what she did. And the lady that working there at the counter had originally given this customer 2 separate tickets. And when she gave her these tickets, she had apparently told her that it was for a certain amount of money. I don't remember exactly how much the amount of money was. Let's just say $100. But the customer believed that the 2 tickets combined were for $100. But the worker meant that the 2 tickets were $100 apiece. There was this miscommunication. They get to arguing about it, and the customer starts cussing her out, saying that she was lying and trying to cheat her and this and that. And the lady at the counter got just as angry, and she started giving it back to her. And she's talking about how she can see her own handwriting and she knows what the price is, and starts cussing her out. She ends up using a racial slur, and it was very, very uncomfortable standing there. I was just kind of standing there quietly, waiting. I was thinking, I just want to pick up my sport coat. But it just got, the whole situation just escalated, and it got out of hand so quickly. Because anger was responded to with anger. Both of them let their anger control them. Thankfully, the customer ended up paying and leaving, yelling the entire time, walking out. But it could have easily just kept on getting worse. The neuroscientists call this type of response an amygdala hijack. Whenever your brain receives any stimulus from the outside world, it gets divided up between 2 parts of your brain. Part of the stimulus is directed toward your neocortex. Your neocortex is the thinking, the rational part of your brain. The other part of the stimulus is directed towards your amygdala. The amygdala controls your emotions. It's the emotional, irrational part of your brain. And when you are in a highly emotional, highly stressful, highly tense situation, you experience an amygdala hijack. Your amygdala hijacks your neocortex. I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but you no longer think rationally. The irrational part of your brain, the emotional part of your brain, hijacks the thinking rational part of your brain. An amygdala hijack causes a personal emotional response that is immediate, it's overwhelming, and it is out of measure with the actual stimulus because it's triggered a much more significant emotional threat. What that means is that a amygdala hijack triggers our flight or fight response, flight response, where we either fight, we lash out in anger, or we flee, we bottle it up inside. That is exactly what happened to the Israelites. They experienced an amygdala hijack. They were no longer thinking rationally. They were coming up with conspiracy theories about Moses taking them out into the desert to let them die of thirst. Moses also had his amygdala hijack. He accused them of wanting to stone him, right? So both sides had an amygdala hijack in this moment. It led to complaining, it led to making demands, divisive arguing, cynicism, conspiracy theories, doom and gloom thinking, and worst case scenarios. I don't know about you, but that sounds very familiar to the world we live in right now. You could say that we live in one big amygdala hijack. But instead of letting your anger control you, control your anger. When you are angry, stop and pray. If you need to leave the situation and take a moment alone, do that. Sometimes it's not always possible, but try to take a minute and stop and pray. Say a quick prayer. Direct your focus back to God, and then come back and resolve the situation with poise and maturity, with grace and love. Be the leader that sets the example. Be the first one to try to de-escalate the situation. Don't continue to allow your emotions to escalate the situation even more. Don't reflect how the world handles anger, but instead reflect the peace and love of God. To finish up here this morning, I just want to give you some practical advice about how to de-escalate situations when you become angry. All of this advice comes from the book of Proverbs about how or what to do when you become angry or when someone else becomes angry with you. The first bit of practical advice is to sit down. There's just something about going from a standing position to a sitting position that helps your body and your mind relax. I think that in general, our body and our mind are kind of trained to relax when we sit down. When we sit down, we tend to relax. And when we go from a standing position to a sitting position, it helps us to calm our emotions. It also helps to turn the confrontation into a conversation. You can sit down and you say, hey, let's both sit down and talk about this. Have a conversation instead of allowing things to escalate. It helps to de-escalate tensions. Proverbs 15:1 says this: a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Sit down and have a conversation. The second thing is to wait to respond. Again, it might not always be possible in every situation, but if at all possible, you should try to implement a 24-hour rule. Don't just respond off the cuff. Stop and wait to respond. Wait a day or more before you respond to the situation. This allows you to calm down emotionally. It gives you time to pray about it. It gives you time to think through an appropriate response. And it even gives you time to maybe even talk with other people about how you should respond and get wise advice, get their opinion about how to respond to the situation. Now, Proverbs 15:18 says, a hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man, one who waits to respond, calms a quarrel. Sit down, wait to respond, and third, remember your calling. What is our calling? We're called to follow the two great commandments, to love God and to love other people. Remember your calling to love. Do not let your anger turn into hate. Do not let it create discord or conflict, but instead control your anger and respond with love. Proverbs 10:12 says, hatred stirs up dissension, but love covers over all wrongs. If you're dealing with some unresolved anger this morning, and maybe you need some prayer, maybe you need someone to sit down and talk with and help you work through your emotions, or maybe you need advice on how to deal with the situation you're in, advice about how to heal broken relationships that have been damaged because of anger, I invite you to come forward this morning. I'm here to talk with you, to pray with you. Our elders would love to sit down and talk with you and pray with you. But learning to control our anger is a key to healthy relationships. For some of you, the relationship between you and God has been broken because of your sin. Because of our sin, God has righteous indignation toward us. But He resolved it when He sent His Son into this world to take the penalty for our sins. He has made a way for us to be reconciled to Himself. The Bible tells us if we put our faith and our trust in Jesus Christ and get baptized, the enmity, the strife, the tension between us and God is resolved. And He adopts us into His family as His sons and daughters. The relationship is restored. If that's a decision that you want to make this morning, I invite you to come forward during this next song as well. Would you pray with me? God, we thank you for doing what it took to resolve the situation that we were in. We couldn't do it ourselves. We could not restore the relationship that was damaged between us and you because of our sin. And we thank you so much for coming into this world and resolving it. Help us to be peacemakers. Whenever emotions are running high and there's tension because of anger, I pray that you would help us to know how to respond, how to resolve situations, how to calm emotions. Help us turn those confrontations into conversations. Help us to control our emotions so that we can lead others to do the same. My God, I pray that this church would be a church of peacemakers. There's so many problems and issues in this world that I pray that this church would work to resolve problems and issues in this community. There's so much anger in our world today, and I just pray that we would be an influence for love and peace. Help us to give gentle answers and to return evil with blessing. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Would you stand as we sing?